Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please take the floor.
Yes.
It's all yours.
Thanks to goes to the panel for that insightful conversation. Indeed, there is a shift going on in DevOps, and we are here to embrace it, but we can't go on without first understanding the basics. Let me share my screen. So let's assume a scenario. You have a company that you are running and you have outsourced a vendor. There is a certain feature that you have to implement. I'm going to benchmark on a logistics company. Let me see something changed in your pricing, and you'd have to change fuel surcharge in the way that you price in your company. You are contacting the vendor, and you'd want them to change something in the code. The vendor would ask you, or you would ask them, what is the current running version of the code? This will now, that question to that answer will now depend on the vendor. How did they develop their workflow? How did they model the architecture of the system? Currently in Uganda, we are having an issue with vendors that we are partnering with companies in order to do vendor development, that is a customized software development. And that brings me to today's conversation. How do companies regain control of their infrastructure when working with vendors? So in such a case where the vendor just gave you a zip file, you would have the code, but you would not have the whole source code. You'd need to contact the vendor, they give you the source code, and you have to go through that source code. So what arrives would be a zip file if the vendor didn't comply to the standards, to the new DevOps lifecycle, where you have a CI/CD in place and an infrastructure that supports continuity. Here I want to see no Git history, no branches, and there is a likely possibility that whatever is running in production isn't what is in the source code that I will share with you. There would also be a likely possibility that no one will know what files changed and what is causing the error that you're having in the current system. So what is the issue in this case? You have a company owning the system. They paid for every line of code. In this case, we are having our company Northline. However, they cannot even change one number. Let me say in an invoice. Let me say they cannot change anything in the invoice code that is currently running in the production workflow. So in here, every party behaved normally. They owned everything completely. However, none controlled anything on it. The gap between ownership and control is what this talk is all about. So in these next 30 minutes, I'll be talking about why this happens. Why do we see many things happening between vendors and the company in terms of code management and code principles? You'd have a company that is trying to comply with the standards, but then they employ vendors who are not complying the standards, and yet they let on that interaction grow. Or in case they see an issue, they tend to fire the whole team, yet they should have embraced this whole DevOps lifecycle at the start. So we have to see why this happens and why it isn't the fault of the vendor or the company. We are going to look at the symptoms you can check for on Monday if you are running a company to see if all the code that you have is following proper CI/CD. We should be able to do a simple live demo in order for you to set up a self-hosted runner on premise. And then we'll see why moving the cloud will not save you regardless if you do not have a proper, let me say, proper version control policy, and you don't have a proper version control policy, and you do not have a proper CI/CD in the architecture that you deploy the system. So let's look at the vendor model. Instead of you hiring 4 engineers taking 9 months, the company would not be able to cater for that. However, you have a chance to hire a vendor who could do this work in 12 weeks. In this case, the company will outsource that risk to the vendor, and then the company in turn will get domain software they could never hire staff for. So in this case, the company that is not lying outsources the build, the deploy, the release history, the environment, and the knowledge of why anything is the way it is. So in this case, you have the vendor and the client. The vendor will be focusing on delivering things first and moving to the next client. And they will also be focused on shipping the code as per the requirements, while at the same time keeping the team small in order to get as much possible net revenue on the project as possible. On the client, on the other side, they would prioritize a working system. As long as they see the system is working, that is all they cater for. They won't pay for the process, and also they want to keep the price of the whole contract small. In this case, however, we are seeing a huge gap. It is paying for traceability, so no one builds it. This is where the conflicts arise from. There is a previous project that I got the chance to work on, and their issue is that they had all the code. They had all the code, and I tried to ask them while trying to build out now the CI/CD in order to deploy the whole system. I asked for them. I first asked for them, where is the code? They presented a zip file. I asked, is there a GitHub? Do you have GitHub for an organization to keep the code? Everyone was blank. That is when I saw that the work that I'm headed into is too big. So this is the current problem that we have, especially in the Ugandan setup, where the process is not audited at the start. You'd find that they wait until the end when they have the final product in order now to look at the process. That is how a build comes from development into production. While this whole traceability needs to be done from the very point that a contract is signed between the client and the vendor. So in this case, for anyone who is here, so it's 2:30 and we are all on screen. So I just need like 50 seconds from each of you. I just have 6 questions, and you just have to type a number in the chat. You just have to type a number in the chat for each of the questions. So let me proceed to the first question. In your company or where you are currently working at, can you see the commit that caused an issue? And without having to first do a phone call or a Google Meet, that's a question you can have. So you can just type an answer in the chat, maybe a yes or no. In your current company, if anything breaks, are you able to see where the issue came from without having to first call the vendor? This is usually in case, let me say you are an app support person, that is you liaise with a vendor in order to see features and maybe in order to solve conflicts between the users and the application. you could see issues, but in this case, you have to call the vendor in order to see what went wrong. So if in your current company that you're working, you have to call the vendor in order to see what's wrong, then that's an issue. Okay, in case the build's still in the chat, maybe you can all type. In your current company or project or startup, whatever it may be, a build still happening on the server. Let me say somebody SSHs into the server, pulls from GitHub, and then restarts. That's something you could check. Let me say you have an on-premise server, you have to pull the code from GitHub, and then you run the code on the server. That's also something to ask. I don't know, are there some answers in the chat I can use? Right, so someone saying good question to an extent. Yes, I don't know, was this for the first question or the second? I'm assuming it was for the second. Yes, for the first. So one is saying that can we see the commit that caused this? Yes, so if it's a yes in this case, it means that at least you are not badly off. One person can deploy and they are on leave. That's still a question. In your current setup, does the deployment depend on one specific human being? Let me say, not one role, one person with the credentials in their head. Is that still happening? Does your deployment have to depend on only one person and not to a specific role? If that is still happening in your current setup, then still it's a gap in your CI/CD and in your DevOps infrastructure. Then also the other question that you could answer, what version is in production? You do not have to type that answer, but is this a question that you can answer offhand or you can see before you have to call a vendor? If the answer is a yes, you can see the version of the production before calling a vendor, then you know that your workflow is good. Then in this case also, if you're talking about rollback in your current setup, does it restore the code to last night's backup? Or does it deploy the code to the last known version? That is also something to fact check in here. Also, has anybody internally ever read the code? Let me say you are still, if you say an app support specialist in say a bank and you are liaising with the vendors, has anybody ever taken the time to review the code? Or do you depend entirely on the truth of the vendor to say that everything is working, and maybe as long as the live usability tests work, you don't go ahead to review the code? So these 6 questions are one of the questions that for a company that doesn't have a proper DevOps workflow and a proper SDLC lifecycle won't have an answer to. And that is the company we are talking about right now. In this case, we are saying that you cannot buy control in a contract. Ownership is a legal fact and it lives in a contract in a layers drawer. Control is an operational capability and it lives in a system you want to run every day. Now, the belief or the issue that we have with clients who usually get vendors in order to do their work is that the fact that they have a contract, they believe they have ownership of the code and the artifacts building up to that code. And yet, in this case, they need to own the process. They need to get their hands dirty when the vendor work starts in order to own that software development life cycle from the very start. So in this case, if you are that kind of company, we are saying that you don't need to fire the vendor in case of any mismatch with what the contract said and what they are currently having. What you need to do is to put a gate. As young children, in case you had a hostile neighbor, in order for that neighbor to prevent you from entering into their house, they would build a gate. In that case, there is no way for a child to jump the gate and then come into their house or mansion without permission. So in this case, we need to know that a legal binding contract between the client and the vendor is not the stop. It does not guarantee us getting the quality of code stated it. That's why we need to put a gate between the vendors and the servers. I believe this picture clearly illustrates that you have a developer and you have the gate and then you have the servers. A developer shouldn't at any time interact with your server unless it is really, really called for. So just as I mentioned, this could be boring, but it is already known and it has to be done. If you're dealing with a proper vendor who is compliant, they already know it and you don't need to retrain them on how to use GitHub or anything. In this case, you need to set up an organization repository on GitHub and not on the vendor's account. This is not restricted to only web apps. However, it also needs to be on the mobile apps. The whole workflow has to be owned by the company. Access to the vendor should be revocable in one click. With GitHub permissions and with GitHub teams, GitHub repositories through the organizations, you can restrict access to anyone or to any vendor in just a simple click. If you do not have that set up as a company that is outsourcing vendors, then you are in very big trouble. Also, you do not need to have to shift to cloud hosting. I know there is a fuss about cloud hosting, and ideally it is justified. However, in this case, if you are this company, you do not need to necessarily shift to the cloud unless it's really called for. The CI runs the CI workflow can run on your server, and the code never has to live in someone else's cloud to be governed, unless it aligns with a business strategy. So before you do have the developer going to your production server and they SSH into your production server and they pull the code from GitHub, or even worse, that is the best case scenario. They could pull the code from GitHub and then run it locally on the server. Or they would get a zip file and then run it over FTP or SSH into production and unzip it and run it either way. So in this case, there is no check on the code. There is no assessment on security vulnerability. There are no reviewers. There is no record and no rollback. That is not the workflow you should follow as a company that is working with a vendor. We are saying that there needs to be a switch. Let me say you have your infrastructure already. Previously, they would SSH into your server. However, in this new architecture, which many companies are using right now, you have the GitHub owned repository, and then you have your premises where the server infrastructure is running. So for any feature that is coming in from the developer, they create a pull request into the main branch. This GitHub provides a platform in order for you to manage the quality of code straight from even the naming of the branch. Say you'd want the naming of the branch to follow a Scrum pattern. Let me say you could have a Scrum name. Let me say Scrum 001 stroke. Let me say the feature is fixing a button. GitHub is properly configured to do that. So after the developers working on the feature locally, they push those changes and then create pull requests into the main branch, or even the dev branch if you have the free standard deployment environments configured. But in case it's a lean structure, you can stick to that as long as you enforce the necessary permissions within the push and the CI. So in this case, they make a pull request, and once you do the code review and everything is okay, you can merge the code into the main. And it is only then, after those approvals are made, that code goes and then it deploys on your on-premise infrastructure. In this case, GitHub will always create an immutable log. With GitHub organization, you are able to see the immutable logs of who, what, when, and why something happened. At no time will you not know what change caused what version change caused what release caused what change, because everything is being logged at GitHub level. So in this kind of setup, there are 4 gates. One of which is branch protection. Branch protection, you are protecting your main branch from direct commits and pushes to it. Also, required status checks. In this case, broken code cannot match. In this case, this is where you see implementing, let me say, a CI for linting and other different CIs in order for you to control those necessary status checks before you merge the code into the main branch. The other one would be the code owners, that is the review. In case you have an internal team, that could be the team that does the review for the vendor's work. You'd want, in an ideal case, to restrict the access that the vendor does have in the quality of code. Yes, it is similar to pair programming in a way, in such a case that one person is seeing what is being is working on the code, and the other one is fact checking to see if the code is okay. Okay. On the self-hosted runner, you build it and you own it. You have to make sure that you own that whole infrastructure on the self-hosted runner. Maybe just to go through what a self-hosted runner is. Unlike in a cloud-hosted environment where you make use of virtual machines and virtual machines specifically, in this case, you are just having a machine with appropriate compute and processing requirements in order for you to run that application. So it has no inbound firewalls and nothing for your security team to veto. GitHub will hold the history and the policy, while your server will do the work of running the whole application. GitHub is more for management of the code. Okay, so in this case, I would like to take us into how we can work out a self-hosted. I'm just going to take you through how we can set up a self-hosted runner, and also how we can configure some of those how we can configure some of those rules. So say could you confirm on your end if you're able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So
Yes. Zoom in a bit.
Pardon?
Kindly zoom in. Yes.
Okay.
For the screenshot.
Is this visible?
Very, very.
Okay. So I'm just going to run a quick session on how to set up a runner. Though ideally, so it could be set up at, let me say you have, this is your personal repository. Setting up a runner is easy. You should first of all set up an organization in case you are a company that wants to restrict a vendor from accessing your work. We could go here, so you have to just go to your GitHub, click here, and then you go to create an organization. This organization would be the central resource for you to create repositories, for you to create anything in order to control and the workflow such that it is not in the hands of the vendor. So in this case, you create, it could be a free organization, or you could choose a team plan. That is in case you are there yet, but a free organization could work for now. For a free organization, obviously there are some limits like branch protection, and that's why you need to configure the priced organization. So I'm just going to set up, let me say, a clouds demo, and then you put a contact email. You can see this is very easy. And then this organization can belong to my personal account, or in case you are a business organization, you can say a business organization, and then you type in the name of that company. For demo purposes, I'm going to choose my personal account, and I click on setup. Once that is in place, you can obviously invite users to contribute to your code. In case you have an in-house internal team, you set them up. For demo purposes, I'm just going to set up a repository. So this is my organization clouds demo. I'm going to set up a repository, cloud demo repo. And then the visibility, for now, I'm just going to set it up to public, and then I'll go ahead and create that repository. So this is done. And once the repository is done, in order to set up your runner, just go to settings and you go to actions, and then you go to general. In this case, you go to runners, actions under runners, and then you set up a new self-hosted runner. As I said earlier, a runner is an agent that runs on your server, and it is kind of handling the automation that is taking place in between. It is handling the automation that's taking place in between GitHub and your server. Just like you would have a runner that is deploying on your virtual machine, in this case, it's deploying to your server. So in this case, you go to new self-hosted runner, and then you do the setup. It could be whether you are dealing with Linux or Windows. For now, I'm going to use Linux, and I'm going to go to my subsystem. So I'm going to go to my subsystem. Share it. In this case, let me just share the whole screen. All right, could you confirm if you're able to see my Linux subsystem, the terminal, and the GitHub interface?
Yes.
Okay. So in this case, we are going to assume a clean area. So this would be as easy as you are creating an actions runner. The setup is guided by GitHub. It is actually very simple. Just follow the instructions as you see them. So in this case, I'm just going to copy this. Okay, just want to run as sudo. Yeah. So you just run the permission as it is. In this case, I need some sudo permissions. Do that. Okay. The first step is creating the actions runner folder. This is the folder or directory within which your runner will be operating. In this case, we have named it actions runner, but you can name it any way you like, In case you have, let me say, 3 environments running on the same server, which is not a recommendation, but I believe with the different restrictions, you can have 3 different environments running on the same server. So you can rename one runner to be a test actions runner. The other could be production actions runner, such that you have the different environments set up. After the runner, you download the runner package. Yeah, don't have the right permission, so I'm just going to use sudo for now. And as that package is downloading, the next step would be to validate and extract the installer. In this case, we are just going to extract the installer for the sake of time. As this is extracting, once that is done, we just configure the runner. So it's the third. Right. So in this case, unfortunately, I do not have the time to switch to my Linux environment. I'm just getting some issues with the subsystem that I currently have. But in this process, once the configuration has been run here, you just run the setup and it will be good to go. After that, you'll be able to control the other permissions that you have. For instance, in case you need to set up a team, you go to Teams and you create a new team. In this case, it is required for you to separate the two teams. You can create a vendor team and then an internal reviewers team. Let me say you have an internal team, internal reviewer team. And this is a team to work internally. So that is an internal reviewer team, and in here you add members that will be working internally. This could be your internal developers, internal non-users. You could, in case you have a very rich development team, they could range from various roles. In here, you can also restrict the kind of access those users do have. For instance, if you have, let me say this is your user. In this case, it is automatically restricting this user to admin permissions. However, let me say you add another user. Another user P112. And for the first accept the invitation. All right, so in case you have a new user, let me say P012, it is easy for you to restrict access of this user to your organization repository and your organization wide. Let me say membership privilege, you come under membership privileges and you attach different privileges. Could be read, it could be write, it could be triage, that is on a paid tier. Or it could simply be write, that is with write permissions, the user can just push permissions. She could have just push permissions to that repository. Aside from having different teams and people, you could also enforce what we call branch protection. In branch protection, for example, if you have cloud demo repo, you could go to settings and settings under rule sets, and you create new rule sets. In this case, let me say we want to create a rule set on the main branch to restrict direct pushes to the main branch. We'll go to new branch rule set, and then you enforce a rule set name, say push to main. And then you enable it. And then right here down below is where you add the necessary permissions. You can see here there is restrict creation, restrict update, require merge queue. require deployments to succeed. These are all different controls that you could put in place for your vendor for your vendor that is working on this repository in order to restrict and their code from coming indirectly and controlling the quality of code you have on the repository. For the sake of time, I'll stop here in the live demo session, but to conclude with this is that the setup is actually very easy. It can be done by anyone as long as you take time to do it. It is something that can save your company time and money in case you have a vendor on board. It could also be one of the reasons why you have a higher uptime compared to a company that does not have control and ownership over a simple task as, let me say, pushing your code to the main branch. All right, so where does this fail, however? Still, in the process of employing this change in your current company setup, believe me, it's not going to be easy. If you don't have this setup, if you don't have a proper setup of how the infrastructure goes straight up from coding to deployment, you are going to see, for example, a project within a budget and no visible output, while the vendor will see things like they have more unpaid work and they are saying that you don't trust them. In order to create that visibility, such controls in place and along with usual project management controls could see the value of the output in the project being increased. This is a simple workflow that you can. This is a 90-day path that you can deploy in your setup in case you are having these issues between you, the company, and the vendor. In the first 14 days, you can set up the GitHub repository, import the code as is, and then the vendor pushes that code into the system. This is a path that I employed in my current in one of my previous projects that I worked on, and it worked. You have to first own the code. After getting all the code, then you go on now enforcing these restrictions like code owners, internal reviewer teams, and that. After ensuring that the code is in place and the restrictions are in place, then you go on to do the build and testing the CI, and restricting server rebuilds, and then setting up things like self-hosted runners, and then say a test and a production workflow. A production environment. So also, code needs to be committed to a repository owned by the client. Deliverables should be targeted releases in the repository, not just a vendor thinking up of something and just deploying it. Vendor access to the repositories should be via named accounts, and this should be revocable by the client, in this case, the company. So after 90 days, if you deploy this, you'll see that deploys that were previously, let me say, monthly and feared, they can be weekly or even between days, and they could be boring in such a way that you have everything under control, other than you praying for something to work. What changed? In this case, it would be easy to see it. You do not need to have to call the vendor in order to see what changed. Roll back, in this case, let me say, instead of doing 4 hours of rollback, it could be one rerun, and you know the version you are rolling back to. People who can deploy, they can be more than one person, because now the deployment workflow is switched, unlike previously, where it was one person doing that. That is fine. So if you have that setup in place for on-premise, then the next section could be, do you need now to move to the cloud? This now depends on your business strategy. You need to first be able to handle the cloud cost, the FinOps and everything that moves with it. Cloud will come with other known expenses, obviously, because in this stage you'll switch from CapEx expenditures to OpEx expenditures. And in OpEx, you'll see monthly costs of storage, compute, such stuff. This is something that that does not fix the delivery governance. That is the delivery that is being delivered by the vendor. So it means that you have to first govern the way the vendor deploys the code more than first going to switch to the cloud. So the order matters more than the destination. That is, everything should be traceable, repeatable, and auditable. That is, for that, after having that, it is only then that you can now take the decision of switching to on-premise or of either staying on-premise or switching to cloud. Though obviously in the long run, whether you want it or not, cloud will be the way.